The first socket struck the marble floor hard enough to make 40 people stop breathing. She clutched her cardboard model of an accessible stairwell and watched her father close one hand around a red-handled screwdriver. Then a chair scraped behind her. Claire Rowan, the company's general counsel, stood. One engineer rose beside her. Daniel's supervisor had approved one quiet exception if Mia stayed behind the desk. Her model showed a wide landing, a low handrail, and a bright red emergency door. They rode the service elevator to level 3. The emergency stair door did open inward. Worse, the magnetic lock released only after Daniel pulled twice. A green inspection sticker on the frame said the system had passed the previous week. Daniel photographed the sticker, the hinge, and the access panel. He did not pretend to be an engineer. He knew what his job taught him. A door labeled emergency should release on the first pull. His radio crackled. "Harper, why are you off the lobby route?" Glenn. Pritchard, facilities supervisor, arrived before Daniel answered. He was a thick-shouldered man with a permanent crease between his eyebrows and a habit of treating questions like theft. "Family event prep is downstairs," Glenn said. Daniel showed him the door. "The lock drags. The sticker says it passed." Glenn tried it once. The door opened cleanly for him. "Looks fine. It didn't 2 minutes ago. Then clean the contacts and move on." Daniel removed the access cover. One wire had been looped around a relay, so the alarm panel reported a normal release even when the magnet stayed engaged. Someone had not merely missed a defect. Someone had hidden it. Mia leaned closer. Daniel moved her back with one arm. "Behind the yellow line," he said. Fatherhood changed the next choice. Alone, Daniel might have photographed the wire and returned it exactly as found. With Mia watching, he could not leave a door unreliable until morning. He radioed security, placed the stairwell on fire watch, and disabled the magnet so the door remained unlocked. Glenn's voice tightened. "You just created an open access point during merger week. I created an exit that opens." "Put it back." Daniel refused. The immediate cost arrived before midnight. Glenn removed him from the lobby rotation, canceled 4 overtime hours, and ordered him to write a statement saying dust had caused a temporary fault. Daniel wrote instead that he had found a bypassed relay and attached the photographs. At home, he placed the red-handled screwdriver in the dented toolbox and counted money at the kitchen table. Rent was 5 days away. Mia needed $26 for the science fair display fee. The canceled overtime was exactly the amount he had planned to use for both. "I can skip the fair," Mia said. "No. You always say a plan changes when the facts change. Your project is not the part that changes." He heard how quickly he answered and knew pride was speaking before judgment. Elena used to say a promise became dangerous when keeping it mattered more than the person it was meant to protect. Daniel opened his banking app, moved grocery money to rent, and told Mia they would decide together after Friday. He did not promise what he could not yet pay. The next morning, Family Innovation Day transformed Axiom's lobby into a showpiece. White display tables lined the glass walls. Employees brought children carrying robots, model bridges, and poster boards. Cameras waited for Victor Sloan, who planned to announce the proposed sale of Axiom's headquarters to North Star Development while presenting it as an investment in the company's future. Axiom designed traffic signals, library access systems, and public building controls. Victor had spent 3 years rebuilding its reputation after a failed expansion. The headquarters sale would erase debt and protect hundreds of jobs. He believed delay was a luxury the company could not afford. Claire Rowan arrived at 7. She was 43, precise without being cold, and responsible for telling the board which risks could be survived. She noticed the Level 3 incident report in her overnight queue. Glenn's summary called it routine cleaning of a responsive lock. Daniel's photographs showed a wire bypass. Claire forwarded the file to Victor and requested a pause on the building certification attached to the sale. Victor called within a minute. "A janitor opened a panel he wasn't authorized to touch," he said. The panel controlled an emergency exit. "The engineering certificate is signed." Then the photographs deserve an explanation. Victor told her the buyer's deadline was noon. Missing it could reduce the offer by $6 million. Claire replied that a false safety disclosure could cost more than money. Victor ended the call before either of them said the word postpone. Daniel clocked in at 8 with Mia beside him. Glenn took the toolbox from Daniel's cart and told him to report to the lobby. The crowd had already gathered around the children's projects. Victor stood beside Mia's model. He had learned from Glenn that the janitor's daughter created a stairwell display using the exact door under dispute. To Victor, it looked coordinated. A worker creating a safety problem, documenting it, then placing his child in front of cameras with a matching project. "You used a company event to stage an accusation," Victor said. Daniel kept his voice low. "My daughter built that model before I found the wire." "And you expect 40 employees to believe that?" Maya stepped toward her father. Claire moved out of the crowd but did not interrupt. She needed to hear whether Daniel claimed expertise he did not have. "I expect the door to open," Daniel said. "Nothing else requires belief." Victor held up the toolbox. "Your job is to maintain this building, not sabotage it." Transaction. "My job does not include signing a false statement." Across the lobby, employees lowered their phones. Some had expected a polished announcement about the sale. Instead, they were watching a worker defend a door most of them used without noticing. Mia held her model against her chest. The crowd made the power gap larger, but it also meant Victor's next choice would have witnesses no private memo could edit. Daniel saw. Claire glanced toward the security camera above the reception desk. He understood she was marking the record, not promising rescue. Whatever happened next, the lobby would remember more accurately than either man's anger. The word false landed in front of the cameras. Victor's control broke. He flipped the toolbox, and Daniel's tools scattered across the floor. "Pick it up," he said. "Then clear your locker." "You're fired." Mia's face went still. Daniel knelt, picked up the red-handled screwdriver, and met her eyes. That was when Claire stood. The 40 workers followed. The silence lasted 11 seconds. Later, people would describe it as a protest. At the time, no one knew what it was. Claire had stood because corporate counsel could not watch the CO destroy potential evidence. The engineer beside her stood because Daniel had fixed her son's wheelchair ramp after a contractor left it uneven. The receptionist stood because Daniel had waited with her after a late shift when the garage lights failed. Others stood because staying seated felt like agreement. Victor ordered everyone back to work. No one moved until Mia crossed the lobby and placed her model beside her father's tools. "The door still opens wrong," she said. The employees did not chant or surround Victor. They remained in their own places, which made the gesture harder to dismiss as disorder. A payroll clerk turned her phone face down. 2 engineers moved away from the North Star display. The mothers and fathers near the children's tables drew their kids close without leaving. The crowd had become a set of witnesses rather than an audience waiting to be entertained. Daniel noticed Mia's science teacher near the back. Shame rose in him before anger. He had spent years making his work invisible, so Mia would never have to defend it. Now every polished surface in the lobby reflected him on one knee. He picked up the smallest socket and set it inside the box. Mia knelt to help. Daniel touched her wrist gently. "You hold the model," he said. "These are mine to collect." He did not mean the tools alone. Mia understood enough to stand. Again, Claire asked security to preserve the lobby footage and the Level 3 access records. That was her first plot-changing action. She did not defend Daniel's character. She protected the facts before power could erase them. Victor told her she was overstepping. Claire answered that the sale agreement required a truthful building disclosure and that Daniel's termination during a pending safety report created a retaliation risk. She suspended the dismissal for 24 hours, under the company's investigation policy. "You cannot suspend my decision," Victor said. "The policy has your signature." Daniel remained kneeling while the argument moved above him. He finished collecting each tool. He would not leave his labor scattered as a symbol for executives to debate. Claire offered him a conference room. Daniel asked first whether Mia could stay. When Claire said yes, he accepted. Fatherhood set the boundary before his own defense. Inside, Claire explained that she represented the company, not him. Daniel appreciated the clarity. She also offered him water and asked whether he needed a break before answering questions. Daniel declined the water but accepted 5 minutes to call Mia's school. The family event had been scheduled to end at noon. The investigation could last all day. His first practical concern was not public vindication. It was who would supervise his daughter, while adults decided whether he still had employment. Claire arranged a screened family room with 2 employees present and documented it as emergency childcare, not a personal favor. That distinction mattered to Daniel. Help provided by policy could be used by the next parent too. Mia asked to keep the toolbox with her. Daniel let her keep only the model. The tools might become evidence, and he did not want a child responsible for guarding them. "Did you bypass the relay?" she asked. "No. Can you prove when you first saw it?" He showed her Mia's photo from the night before. Mia had photographed her model beside the real door at 9:14 p.m. The access cover was visible behind it, still sealed with a maintenance sticker. Daniel's next photograph, time-stamped 3 minutes later, showed the cover removed and the looped wire inside. Claire asked why he opened a controlled panel without authorization. "Because the exit did not release. I placed it on Firewatch first. Security logged the call. Why not wait for an engineer? Because children were scheduled on that floor this morning." The answer was competent and limited. Daniel did not claim he could certify the system. He claimed he could recognize an exit that failed. Claire's second test concerned the green inspection sticker. Daniel produced the building log showing a contractor named Meridian Access had signed 14 doors in 42 minutes. Claire knew no complete inspection could move that fast. Still, speed was not proof of fraud. She called Meridian's director. He said Glenn had provided pre-tested results and asked the contractor only to verify labels. Glenn had described the same arrangement as a full on-site inspection. Two versions of one event now existed. Claire interviewed the lobby witnesses in groups of 2. She asked the same questions in the same order: where they stood, what they heard, what they saw before the toolbox opened, and whether anyone instructed them to rise. The answers differed in small ways. Some heard Victor say, "Clear your locker" before "pick it up." Others heard the reverse. Those differences made the statements more credible, not less. 40 people had not memorized one story. The receptionist, Hannah Cole, explained why she stood. Months earlier, Daniel had found her crying beside a stalled garage gate after a late shift. He repaired the sensor, waited until her ride arrived, and never mentioned it. Claire stopped her before the story became a character testimonial. "I need what happened today," Claire said. Hannah nodded. "Today I saw the CO empty his tools after he said the report was false. Then I saw Daniel look at his daughter before he touched anything. That was a fact with emotional meaning, not praise." Victor entered with a severance offer. It included 6 months of pay, health coverage, and the science fair fee for Mia. In exchange, Daniel would state that he misunderstood the relay and re-signed voluntarily. 6 months of pay was more security than Daniel had held since Elena died. He imagined. Rent paid, groceries without subtraction, Mia remaining at the same school. Victor knew exactly how to price silence for a father. Daniel asked for 10 minutes alone with Mia. He did not tell her the company was buying her agreement. He told her the real choices. If he signed, they would be safe for a while, but his statement would become the official record. If he refused, he could lose the job. And the money and the investigation might still clear the company. "Would the door be fixed?" Maya asked. "Probably. Would they check the others? I don't know." She looked at the red door on her model. Mom said a drawing is a promise about what should exist. Daniel remembered Elena saying it. He also remembered her telling him never to make a child carry an adult's moral burden. "This is my decision," he said. "You don't have to make it for me." "Then why did you tell me?" "Because the cost belongs to both of us, and you deserve the truth." Daniel rejected the severance but requested the unpaid wages required by law. Dignity did not mean pretending money was beneath him. At noon, North Star Development extended the sale deadline by 48 hours. Claire had persuaded one board member that closing with an unresolved exit report would expose the buyer too. Victor blamed her for weakening the price. Claire responded by appointing an independent fire safety engineer and a neutral employment investigator. She included Daniel as a paid factual witness, not a consultant, and gave him access only to records related to his work. This forced proximity came from authority and evidence, not romance. Daniel accepted on the condition that Mia's childcare costs be covered at the standard employee emergency rate and that all staff interviews be protected from retaliation. Their first inspection found the level 3 door was not isolated. 2 magnetic locks reported successful release while remaining engaged for nearly 4 seconds. In a crowded emergency, 4 seconds could become a wall. The engineer, Priya Desai, built a test anyone could understand. She placed a strip of paper between the magnet and plate, triggered the release, and pulled. On a working door, the paper fell immediately. On the faulty doors, it remained pinched while the panel displayed green. Daniel asked Priya to perform every test herself. He held the flashlight and logged locations. When Victor later claimed Daniel manipulated the results, the video showed a licensed engineer at the door and a janitor staying within his role. Mia watched one test from behind the safety line. She added a tiny green light to her model, then crossed it out in red pencil. "Why cross out the light?" Claire asked. "Because a light saying safe isn't the same as the door being safe." Claire wrote the sentence in the margin of the sale disclosure. Daniel demonstrated the fault. Claire recorded it. The engineer confirmed the system failed code but refused to speculate about intent. Victor argued old relays could stick. Daniel agreed. Then, he showed that all 3 faulty panels carried new Meridian stickers and the same hand-cut jumper wire. The second test moved from competence to character. Claire found an email Daniel had sent Glenn 6 months earlier about a loading dock alarm. He had accepted Glenn's explanation and closed the ticket. If Daniel were building a case against the company, he could have exaggerated it. Instead, he had recorded what he knew, and what he did not. "Small facts," Claire said. "Large accusations give people somewhere to hide," Daniel replied. At the science fair that afternoon, Mia's model sat between a solar oven and a cardboard crane. Daniel arrived late because of the inspection. He had missed the first presentation, and the hurt in Mia's face made every corporate argument feel abstract. Claire arrived carrying the display fee receipt. She had processed it as emergency childcare. Support, not charity. Mia asked whether Claire worked for the man who dumped the toolbox. "Yes," Claire said. "Does that mean you agree with him?" "It means I am responsible for what the company does next." That answer did not ask a child for forgiveness. Daniel respected it. The audit's first major turn came from the building's own memory. Access logs showed Glenn entered the Level 3 panel at 6:42 p.m., 2 hours, before Daniel found the bypass. Glenn claimed he had checked cleaning supplies. The nearest supply closet was on Level 2. Claire confronted him with the timestamp. Glenn admitted installing the jumper, but said Victor's chief operating officer, Leonard Shaw, had ordered every exception cleared before the buyer's inspection. Leonard denied giving technical instructions. He said only that unresolved alarms could delay the sale. Pressure had traveled downward as implication. Each person translated urgency into one more dishonest act. Victor suspended Glenn and declared the issue contained. Daniel refused to call it contained until every door was tested and the report chain examined. Victor leaned across the conference table. "You were a janitor yesterday. Today you think you run the company." Daniel set the red-handled screwdriver on the table. "Yesterday the door was still wrong. My title didn't change that." Claire saw Victor's contempt return. She also saw his fear. If the sale failed, Axiom might violate its lending covenant within a month. Hundreds of jobs were genuinely at risk. Victor had not invented the urgency. He had chosen humiliation and concealment as tools for managing it. That made him more dangerous than a simple villain. It also meant stopping him required an alternative, not merely exposure. The independent engineer spent the night testing every controlled exit. 7 failed. 4 had jumper wires. 3 used outdated firmware that Meridian had invoiced Axiom to replace. The repair estimate was modest compared with the sale, but the false certification threatened the buyer's trust. Northstar's lawyers requested the raw records before breakfast. Victor wanted Claire to send a summary first and promise corrected certification by closing. Claire refused to separate the buyer's decision from the facts, already known. She sent the engineer's preliminary table with a clear label. Incomplete, subject to verification, 7 failures observed. The buyer's counsel thanked her and paused its own inspection. That response exposed another cost of concealment. Northstar had not demanded perfection. It demanded the ability to price risk. Victor's clean report deprived both sides of that choice. Claire traced the invoices. Meridian was owned by a holding company whose silent partner was Leonard Shaw's brother. The relationship had been disclosed in a footnote 2 years earlier, but Victor approved renewals without competitive bids because Leonard promised faster completion. No single document proved Victor ordered falsification. The evidence showed something more ordinary and more believable. He created a deadline, rewarded clean reports, ignored impossible inspection times, and punished the first worker who made the contradiction public. Daniel found the next setup in his toolbox: On the underside of the red-handled screwdriver, a stripe of white sealant remained from the access cover. He had placed the tool on the conference table during Victor's accusation. Security video showed Glenn reaching for it before Claire stopped the room. Glenn knew the sealant could connect Daniel's photographs to the exact panel and prove the cover had been opened after Glenn's visit. The toolbox itself offered another timeline. Daniel kept a paper. Inventory taped inside the lid because shared carts lost tools. At 8:02 the previous night, he had checked out the red screwdriver and voltage tester. Glenn had signed the same sheet at 6:15 when he borrowed Daniel's small wire cutter and returned it 20 minutes later. The cutter carried a nick shaped like the clean edge on the bypass wire. Again, Daniel refused to overclaim. Many cutters could leave a similar mark. The sheet proved access, not authorship. Claire watched him reduce the power of evidence that might help him. "You know that makes your account stronger," she said. "It makes it accurate. Strong is your department." Claire did not treat the screwdriver as magical evidence. She sent it to the investigator, who matched the sealant batch only as consistent, not unique. Then she combined it with access logs, timestamps, and Glenn's statement. 3 small facts supported one conclusion. Glenn asked to amend his interview. He admitted Leonard told him, "No red lights tomorrow." He believed that meant temporary bypasses were expected. Leonard called him disloyal. Glenn replied that loyalty had not paid for the lawyer he now needed. The board scheduled an emergency meeting. Victor proposed repairing the doors, firing Glenn and Leonard, and closing the sale on time. He offered Daniel reinstatement with a promotion if Daniel signed a statement that Victor did not know about the bypasses. Before answering, Daniel visited the maintenance break room. The workers who had stood in the lobby were divided now. Some wanted him to reject every offer. Others feared the sale delay. A young technician named Omar said his wife was expecting twins and that a lost job would end their health coverage. "I stood because what he did was wrong," Omar said. "That doesn't mean I can afford for the company to fail." Daniel thanked him. Solidarity did not erase competing needs. The 40 workers were not a moral chorus written to agree forever. They were families with mortgages, prescriptions, and children. That conversation changed Daniel's goal. He stopped asking only how to prove retaliation and began asking whether the headquarters sale had a viable alternative. He sent Claire a list of unused properties visible in facilities records. He did not know their market value, but he knew which buildings sat empty. One was the vacant warehouse Claire later included in the credit union proposal. Daniel could truthfully say he had no evidence. Victor knew the technical method. He could not say Victor's public retaliation was unrelated to the report. Claire advised him to obtain independent counsel. She arranged a list of legal aid contacts but did not choose one for him. Their trust progressed through boundaries, not rescue. At home, Daniel received an eviction warning. The property manager had tolerated late rent twice, not 3 times. The paid witness hours would not arrive before Monday. Daniel considered selling Elena's drafting table. Mia used it for homework and never knew her mother had drawn city libraries there. He photographed the table for an online listing. Before posting it, he opened the shallow center drawer and found Elena's original sketch of a library stairwell. A note in the corner read, "If the public can't use the entrance, the building isn't public yet." Daniel sat on the kitchen floor with the paper across his knees. Grief did not deliver new evidence or solve rent. It reminded him that Mia's model came from years of watching 2 parents treat design. As a promise, he removed the listing and sold his television instead. The price covered half the rent. For the rest, he applied to the Employee Emergency Fund using the same form any worker could use. Accepting a transparent benefit felt different from accepting Victor's private severance. One required need, the other required a lie. He called Claire to say he might accept reinstatement without the false clause. "That is not weakness," she said. "A job can be part of a fair remedy. Victor will make it sound like he saved me." You cannot build your life around controlling how he tells the story. Daniel needed that correction. Pride could become another executive giving orders inside his head. The next morning, 40 employees who had stood in the lobby delivered signed statements. They did not all praise Daniel. Some barely knew him. They described what they witnessed. Victor dumped the tools after Daniel mentioned a false report, fired him within seconds, and offered money before the safety review began. Their collective precision turned a dramatic moment into evidence. Mia wanted to submit her own statement. Daniel refused at first. He did not want the company using her pain to humanize a compliance file. "I was there," she said. "You said witnesses tell what they saw. Fatherhood." Changed the decision again. Protecting her could not mean erasing her agency. Daniel let Mia record a 5-sentence statement with a child advocate present. She described the toolbox, the words, and the workers standing. She did not disclose rent, grief, or private fear. Claire's third plot-changing action came before the board meeting. Victor ordered legal to classify the lobby footage as privileged and withhold it from the independent investigator. Claire refused in writing. She sent the footage under the investigation protocol and copied the audit committee. Victor removed her as general counsel effective immediately. Claire kept her seat at the board meeting because she was also corporate secretary until a formal vote replaced her. She entered without her executive badge, carrying a paper binder. Daniel noticed the absence. The company had taken her access, not her responsibility. The boardroom overlooked the bright lobby. Victor presented first. He acknowledged operational failures and called the public firing regrettable. He argued that one executive's poor moment should not destroy a transaction protecting 400 jobs. Northstar's final offer expired at 5. Claire presented the alternative. A regional credit union would extend Axiom's debt for 90 days if the board paused executive bonuses, sold a vacant warehouse instead of headquarters, and accepted independent safety oversight. The terms were painful. They were not fatal. Victor attacked her numbers. Claire admitted the alternative cost more in interest and required smaller expansion plans. She did not pretend integrity was free. Daniel spoke last. He explained the door, the wire, and the report. He refused to diagnose the company's finances or decide who should lead it. "I know what it feels like when a door says exit and doesn't open," he said. "I know what it feels like when a policy says report and the person who reports gets emptied onto the floor. If those words are going to stay on the wall, someone has to make them true." Victor asked whether Daniel wanted revenge. Daniel looked through the glass at Mia waiting with the employee families. "I want my daughter to see me tell the same truth standing up that I told kneeling down." The board vote tied 4-4. Victor held the chair's deciding vote. He chose the Northstar sale. Then Claire invoked a bylaw requiring any director with personal bonus exposure to abstain from a related transaction. Victor's sale bonus was disclosed, but he argued it was standard compensation. Claire produced the compensation committee minutes showing the bonus increased if the building closed with no outstanding exceptions. Victor had to abstain. The board paused the sale 5-3 and accepted the credit union proposal. It also placed Victor on administrative leave pending the retaliation investigation. The external consequence arrived, but the emotional crisis was not over. Northstar announced it would sue. Axiom's stock fell. Employees who had stood for Daniel worried their jobs might disappear because of the delay. Victor met Daniel in the empty lobby after the vote. Security remained nearby. "You think they stood for you," Victor said. "Wait until layoffs begin." Daniel did not answer with triumph. "I think they stood because you gave them a choice they could see." Victor looked at the repaired toolbox beside the security desk. "I built this company out of a rented room. Then you know a building is not the people inside it." For the first time, Victor had no contempt left, only exhaustion. Claire made a costly reciprocal choice. The board offered to restore her if she signed a statement that the legal conflict had been resolved by process. She refused. The company needed counsel who had not become part of the evidence. Instead, she agreed to serve unpaid for 2 weeks only to transfer the investigation cleanly, then step away. She also asked the board to publish her own missed warnings. 6 months earlier, Claire had approved a contract clause allowing Meridian to self-report routine inspections. The clause was legal and common, but it removed a layer of verification. She could have let the investigation focus on Victor, Leonard, and Glenn. Instead, she placed her approval in the timeline. "I did not know they would falsify records," she told the audit committee. "I did know speed was being rewarded more clearly than accuracy. I treated that as an operations problem instead of a legal risk. That was my mistake." The admission cost her a favorable reference from 2 directors. It also gave the next council a map of how reasonable decisions had combined into an unreasonable system. Daniel asked what she would do next. "Learn whether I know how to be useful without a title," she said. He held out the red-handled screwdriver. Start. With the loose display bracket. It was the first joke either of them had made. 90 days later, Axiom still existed. The credit union extension held. Selling the vacant warehouse cost the company expansion space but preserved headquarters and most jobs. 12 executive bonuses were deferred. No hourly worker was laid off. The independent investigation found Victor responsible for retaliatory dismissal and negligent oversight, not for ordering the relay bypass. He resigned. Leonard and Meridian faced civil claims over the false certifications. Glenn kept his job after a suspension, safety training, and a written agreement to testify. Daniel supported that outcome. Accountability did not require pretending fear erased every good thing a person had done. All controlled exits were replaced with systems that displayed actual release times publicly on the maintenance dashboard. Work orders received. Permanent tracking numbers. A worker who reported a safety issue could see who changed its status and why. The company added one more protection at Mia's suggestion. Every green status light on the dashboard had a linked test date and the name of the person authorized to verify it. She did not receive a ceremonial title or scholarship. Axiom paid her the same small design stipend it paid every child whose idea entered the family event pilot. Daniel deposited the check into her savings account. Mia used $5 of allowance to buy red paint for the model door. The board offered Daniel a facilities coordinator title. He accepted only after the job description named his limits. He could inspect routine conditions, stop unsafe access, and request engineers. He could not certify systems beyond his license. Competence became stronger when it admitted its boundary. His first paycheck arrived with the overtime Victor had canceled in reimbursement for independent counsel. Daniel paid rent, restored the grocery money, and handed Mia $26 for the science fair fee she had already earned through a fee waiver. "We can return this," she said. "Or you can use it for the next model." She chose new hinges. Claire did not return to Axiom. She joined a nonprofit that helped workers understand retaliation policies before a crisis. Her relationship with Daniel grew slowly and without a rescue fantasy. She asked before visiting. He stopped treating every offer of help as an attempt to purchase him. She attended Mia's final science presentation and sat in the second row without introducing herself to the judges. Months later, Daniel invited her to dinner at a crowded neighborhood diner. Mia chose the booth and warned Claire that Daniel always ordered coffee too late. They talked about school hinges, bad corporate acronyms, and Elena without turning grief into a test Claire had to pass. When the check came, Claire did not reach for it first. Daniel did not perform generosity he could not afford. They split it. Trust looked ordinary from outside. That was how they knew it was real. Mia's accessible stairwell won a practical design award, not first place. She cared more that Axiom's new family event displayed it beside the real level 3 door. The model's red door opened outward with one finger. The dented toolbox returned to Daniel's cart. He repaired the hinge but left one crease in the lid. Mia asked why he did not hammer it flat. "Because repaired isn't the same as erased," he said. The red-handled screwdriver changed meaning over the months. It began as an ordinary tool. On the lobby floor, it became the thing Daniel reached for while his daughter watched. In the investigation, it carried a trace that supported larger evidence. Later, it lived on a shadow board in the maintenance office, not as a trophy but as a reminder. A tool is honest only when the record around its use is honest too. At the next family Innovation Day, 40 chairs filled the lobby. Daniel arrived before dawn to check every exit. Claire brought coffee. Mia arranged children's models across the tables. A new custodian named Louise discovered a loose panic bar and reported it 30 minutes before the event. The facilities director worried about delaying Victor's successor's speech. Daniel canceled access to that door, called an engineer, and thanked Louise in the public log. "You could have fixed it quietly," Louise said. Quiet fixes are how the next person inherits a mystery. The event began 12 minutes late. Nobody lost a job. The world did not end because an honest report interrupted a schedule. Before the speeches, the new CO asked Daniel to stand near the front. He declined and stayed beside Mia at the edge of the crowd. He did not need the lobby to reverse the image of him kneeling. His dignity had existed in both positions. 40 workers had not saved Daniel by standing. Their gesture bought enough silence for facts to survive. Claire's bylaw had not defeated Victor by cleverness. It forced one conflicted vote out of a decision. Mia's statement had not won the case. It preserved what a child saw without selling her pain. Each action was small enough to understand and costly, enough to matter. Daniel had once believed fatherhood meant hiding every unstable thing until he could replace it with certainty. After Elena died, he kept bills out of sight, softened bad news, and made promises before knowing how to keep them. He wanted Mia to feel safe. Sometimes he only taught her that fear had to be carried alone. The toolbox changed that. On the lobby floor, there was no way to hide the cost. Mia saw humiliation, uncertainty, and the choice her father made inside them. Daniel learned that truth could be given to a child without making the child responsible for solving it. Protection was not secrecy. It was standing close while reality had a name. Claire learned that loyalty to an institution could not mean defending every person who held its authority. Real loyalty was insisting the promises outlast the powerful people who broke them. Victor learned too late that urgency did not transform contempt into leadership. A deadline could explain fear. It could not excuse making another person's dignity the price of speed. The repaired level 3 door opened outward. Mia pushed it with one hand and watched the magnetic lock release at once. "That's how it was supposed to work," she said. On the landing below, Daniel had mounted Elena's old stairwell sketch in a plain frame. There was no plaque praising an executive and no photograph of the lobby confrontation. The drawing simply showed a public entrance wide enough for every person it claimed to welcome. Mia touched the corner of the frame. "Mom would have checked the hinge twice. 3 times, Daniel said. They laughed softly. The sound belonged in the stairwell because the stairwell finally belonged to everyone. Daniel nodded. "Most good things are. The hard part is making the promise true when it costs something." They walked down the stairs together. Behind them, the door closed without sticking. If you had been one of those 40 workers, would you have stood before knowing what it might cost your job? Share your answer and subscribe for more stories about ordinary people choosing dignity when silence would be easier.